interests at stake, and they should follow that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Andrew Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and what a great relief it is to stand on behalf of New Zealand First and not be implicated in any part of that debate. So obviously our financial ideas must have a bit of weight and have a bit of substance. So thank you very much, Mr. Bennett, thank you for that glowing endorsement of New Zealand First financial policies. And in that regard, can I speak to the International Finance Agreements Amendment Bill, this final reading on this, and bring the members back to the focus of this bill, which is basically to sort of rearrange the deck chairs on the world global stage with the IMF, the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, because over recent decades, of course, many economies have changed significantly, but they haven't rebalanced the positions of those emerging countries, particularly like to China, India, Brazil and others, in terms of their percentages in the overall IMF scheme of things. And this basically ensures that it was adopted by the IMF governors in 2008 and 2010 to readjust things on the economic scales in relation to all those economies, and New Zealand is also one of those ones requiring to rebalance its position. And in terms of this, my understanding of reading the bill is something in the order of New Zealand's commitment or underwriting of the IMF is in the order of $1.9 billion or thereabouts, and our contribution to this will be readjusted by the order of $100 million as part of our contribution to the greater scheme of things of the IMF. And that is a valuable contribution in terms of our underwriting of what the IMF does to ensure that there is some balance within world economies, and particularly in the developing countries who need support and some backing from the IMF to ensure that their economies remain relatively stable. In this regard, it is also interesting that Australia passed this a couple of years ago in about 2010, so we're lagging behind a little bit. It would have been good that we could have put this through this Parliament earlier than this, but it is somewhat disappointing. It does take some time for this legislation to get through, and it basically does have full support of National Labour New Zealand First, and it is somewhat disappointing that the Greens are out on a limb on this one once again. In terms of the IMF, it is interesting, Mr. Speaker, that the government fully endorses this and fully supports this and supports what the IMF does. But as I've mentioned in this House before, the government conveniently forgets other recommendations of the IMF, such as the fact that it has commented that the New Zealand dollar is somewhat overvalued, and there should be some adjustment of the New Zealand dollar. And so it's all very well for the government to accept what the IMF does on the one hand when it's convenient to them, but when it's not convenient to the government, such as recommendations that perhaps the New Zealand dollar should be eased a little bit, that is ignored. And in that respect, Mr. Speaker, and I know you'll probably pull me back to the bill that I'm talking about, and I can see you nod. I can see you nodding already and suggesting in that matter. But can I just say, just as other members have talked about bicycles and kaumata from Wainuiomata and other longbows, can I just suggest, as part of my longbow on this subject, that it is perhaps time. It is perhaps time that the Private Member's Bill of the Right Honourable Winston Peters in regards to the Reserve Bank Act was pulled from the ballot, and as it was last year, but pulled again. It's back in the ballot. It's back in the ballot, Honourable Simon Bridges, and we hope that the government this time, because it only lost 61 votes to 60, it was pretty close, touch and go. We were waiting for a couple of government members to cross the House and come with us, and we could see they were chomping at the bit to do that. We could see a lot of them could see, because they knew too that after 26 years, it maybe is time to review the Reserve Bank. It maybe is after 26. You know, most things get reviewed a little bit more often than that. So the Honourable Simon Bridges, I can see you nodding. I can see you nodding in agreement. Come on, nod. I can see you nodding. So I am absolutely confident that when that is pulled again, there will be sound thought around, and it will refer back to what the IMF has said in relation to New Zealand's dollar, New Zealand's Reserve Bank, that maybe we need to be a little bit more creative in how the Reserve Bank operates to ensure that our economy works more effectively, and part of that is, of course, for the benefit of exporters, manufacturers and our trading economy, to ensure that New Zealand can play its full role in the world economy in terms of what we are potentially capable of doing. And at the moment, Mr. Speaker, the potential of New Zealand is certainly being limited by where the dollar is. And just imagine where New Zealand could be today if we just had a little bit of easing of that and could help those exporters and those manufacturers that sadly are finding it pretty grim at times at the moment with where the dollar is. Mr. Speaker, New Zealand First supports New Zealand's international commitment to international organisations. We strongly believe that we have to be a good global player, that we have to play our part, as we do in many areas around the world, in many theatres around the world, where we do play our part where things are required of us. We are known as being a good contributor on the world scale, a good contributor to the United Nations. We contribute even more people to the United Nations this week, which is a good sign. And, so we are playing our bit there. And, Mr. Speaker, New Zealand First endorses this and trusts that it will go through expeditiously.
Chris Ockenvold.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.